Hello and welcome back to this video series on setting up my metadata-driven processing framework for Azure Data Factory from scratch in your environment. This is part 8, and what we're going to do in part 8 is update the metadata database to now customize it to the environment where our new processing framework exists. So if we refer to Visual Studio once more, we are predominantly going to focus here on steps 16 through to 20, and maybe I'll just touch on 21 and 22 as well. So let's get that database sorted out. So the first thing we want to do is give our metadata the subscription ID, and then we need to look at giving it the tenant ID as well, just to support authentication of the framework when it actually goes and runs. So the way I'm going to do that is, let's just get rid of some of these other things that we don't need anymore. In the metadata database project, in the scripts folder, there's a script that I use quite a lot in my development and test environments, which is just called set local authentication details. Now this contains most of what we're going to need actually to complete these final steps in setting up the framework in our environment. I'm actually just going to copy from this lines 8 to 24 because this is going to add the properties that I need and also add the service principal details that we used and we created previously. You'll see that I've put comments in here about running this in SQL command mode. This really is just because I've got the details stored on my local machine as environment variables for my development environment. For you guys, of course, you might want to handle that in a different way, but I'm just going to copy the script and run it manually in Management Studio. So we have our database still very much in its untouched form from when we actually first deployed it. So let's have a new query and let's just have a quick look at the properties table. So you can see we already have properties in here for the tenant and subscription, but of course the values are just default ones that are in the post-deployment scripts. So I want to add those values for the subscription and the tenant that we're now working with. So probably the easiest way to do that, or let's just do it again if you didn't see it last time. In Azure Active Directory, if we go to Properties, I can just copy that directory ID from the properties blade and we can put that in there. So let's just execute that first part just to add that tenant ID, and then let's grab the subscription ID from somewhere in the portal as well. Doesn't really matter where, to be honest. I'm just going to go to the data factory and copy that subscription value. Let's run that store procedure, the same store procedure actually as before, but this time for the subscription. So now if I have another look at the properties table, we can see those new values have been added and we've kind of got some slowly changing behavior in the properties table. There's also a view for the current properties if you want to refer to that instead. Good. So on my checklist of deployment steps, 16 and 17 are done. Next, we need to think about the data factory and also the worker pipelines. So let's deal with 18 and 19 now. So when I deployed my data factory, I called it Framework Factory 01. So what I need to do is in my data factories table, there's already a default value in there, Framework Factory, so close, but not quite. So I'm just going to be lazy and edit that table. Framework Factory 01. The resource group is the same, so I don't actually need to change that. So that's that metadata sorted, and I just need to update my pipelines table. So it has again the default values from my dev environment, most of which is correct because I actually deployed those same worker pipelines. I didn't deploy this intentional error pipeline though. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be lazy again and edit that table, and I'm just going to actually set that intentional error pipeline to false. So the framework won't even try and run it. Other than that, I think we're good. Let's just have a quick look at the stages table. So I think everything in there can kind of stay with the sort of the default values that I'd set up if you just want to run this and then try it out. So I was very original with my processing stages, and they're of course linked to the different worker pipelines. So on my checklist, that's 18 and 19 taken care of. So then step 20. So this is where I need to add some authentication details. Now, earlier when we were working with steps 5 to 7, we were allowing the Azure resources to interact with each other via link services and using Key Vault. So that was kind of one part of the authentication story. The other part of the authentication story now is at runtime, when the framework actually executes, it's going to call out to the Azure function to tell a data factory pipeline to run. So it's that authentication that we now need to deal with. And that SPN and those details are now going to be stored in our metadata, so they can be used at runtime by the processing framework. So I'm going to use that same script that I copied wherever it's gone, probably that one. No, let's clear some stuff down so I can find it. This. So what I want to do is add a service principal to my metadata database, and I need to tell it what the data factory is, the service principal, the secret, the principal name, which is we do have an optional parameter in here as well for the particular pipeline. So depending on how granular you want your security, we can reach out to other data factories now. It doesn't have to be the same one where the core pipelines are running. We can call out to other data factories if we need to. So you can do that here. But just looking at the stored procedure parameters, there is also an optional pipeline, he says. Yes, specific pipeline name. So if you want to have a different service principal for every worker pipeline, you can do that. So, that's entirely optional. Of course, the security model within Data Factory, if all those workers are in the same data factory, setting that owner level access doesn't really do a great deal for the data factory if they're all together. But if you've got, say, 10 worker pipelines in 10 different data factories, you can do that, and this procedure will allow that and then set that relationship up for you. For now, though, I want my framework factory 01, and let's just get rid of some of these because they're not coming from my environment variables. You may recall that when we did this in the earlier videos in my Azure Active Directory, in my app registrations, I created this framework SPN. So that's actually the service principal name. Let's get the application ID. And the secret, I think I actually got it in Notepad. Yes, I did. Excellent. So I could just paste that in there. So because I'm not specifying a pipeline, what this stored procedure will do is it will add the relationships. It'll firstly add the service principal to the service principals table, and then it will use this pipeline auth link table to create that relationship between that one service principal and those worker pipelines that exist in my metadata. So let's just run that. Invalid data factory name. Have I got a typo somewhere? Probably. framework factory 01, framework factory. Interesting. So I copied it from the portal. It looks like we've got some white space in there as well. Not rehearsed. It's all good. So let's just copy that now, just to make sure we have a clean text string. I'm not copying any other characters. I tell you what, let's not be lazy this time. Let's actually do a proper update. Data factory name. I don't want any rubbish in there. Don't need any where conditions because I've only got one data factory in my metadata. Fine, let's just try that again. Good. So if we look at the service principals table, we now have a credential in there. What the procedure also does is it actually encrypts that credential. So it will use the tenant ID in conjunction with a couple of other values to do an encryption by passphrase when you insert that. And the same happens on reverse when we actually get that service principal back from Data Factory. It will decrypt it using the context of the Data Factory that's asking for it to run, basically. Yeah, not the most impenetrable security, but it was really just having those service principal details alongside that metadata that could be used at runtime. So that's that taken care of. So that's step 20. Pipeline parameters I don't need to actually worry about because we've already got some default values in here that I'm going to use with those same worker pipelines from my dev environment, so I can kind of leave those in place. And then point 22 is about adding email recipients and alerting. Now you recall when I deployed my Azure functions, I didn't actually give that send email function any SMTP details to actually send email alerts. So I'm not going to use that functionality on this occasion. So what I'm going to do is, again, don't judge me for laziness. I'm actually just going to disable the email alerting capability at the moment. I might add it and do it in a later video. So I don't need to set up any email alerting or recipients or anything. I'm just going to disable that feature for now. Okay, and that, folks, I believe now just concludes kind of this section and concludes this video, part 8. We now have that metadata in place. So in the next part, we'll basically run it. So join me again soon. Thank you.